On this podcast, we talk to leaders, teachers, artists, and scientists from around the globe to explore how to bring more justice and mercy in our own world. Today, we are privileged to have two faculty members with us, Erin Mallea. Erin Mallea is a multidisciplinary artist and assistant professor of art at Penn State. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
And we have our very own Sarah Shotland, who is a part of the Carlow faculty. And Erin is a part of the Department of Writing. So welcome,
Thank you.
Sarah. Okay, here we go. Let's get started with the conversation today, which is how do we use art to create a more just and merciful world? I'm really interested to hear your take on this. We participated together in the forum, but we sit in the midst of all your art right now, of your work. And, take us to what inspired you to do this kind of art? How is this art helping us to really encourage others to create a more just and merciful world?
So, to give background, I guess, on the exhibition, briefly, it sort of inspired, developed from just living in Pittsburgh and living in proximity to, I don't live too far from the Edgar Thompson works and sort of get wafts of smell. So it's looking at the kind of experiences of living in proximity to industrial pollution. That's what sort of inspired the project. So I don't want to I'll go do a walkthrough shortly and kind of give more information about all those things. But in terms of I guess there's different components. There are smells that I created that are kind of referencing some of the pollutant smells that will be released in the gallery based on the real-time air quality index reading from a sensor near Clairton Coke Works in Clairton. There's a short film that follows a couple community members that have learned a method to read visible emissions, so to read smoke and report violations. So people who work in the industry do this training, people who work for the state and like the EPA do this training, but there's also just concerned residents that have learned this training so that they can report violations because not enough has been done. So that's just kind of background on the show. But in terms of the sort of power of art to bring about a kind of more just and merciful world, I think there's a lot of different things. I think one of the things that art can do is, first of all, can be experiential in a way that other types of reporting, kind of like political activism, can't always express. So in terms of like the smells that I've created, like that's one kind of obvious layer. In terms of briefly, it doesn't give the full representation of sort of living nearby, smelling these different smells, hearing the really loud sounds constantly, but gives a small insight into that experience. The film gives a little bit of insight into people who are actively trying to make change in the community, but there's also a lot of sensory experiences in the film in terms of the sounds that are very kind of overwhelming. There's lots of alarms constantly going off, and one of the Melanie, who is one of the people that I film, references that they don't know what any of the sounds really mean, and if they did, like what would that could kind of transform their ability to advocate for the community and to advocate for what's going on, like a better understanding of what's going on. So I think what art can do from my perspective is that in reporting and in, like public health studies of this, you have to do it a very particular way, of course. You're kind of gathering data, you're gathering evidence, you have to walk through these different steps to sort of prove what's going on. And I think with art, the power is that it can layer like the emotional, it can layer the experiential, it can layer the sort of both the kind of the political and the personal in ways that other types of, I think is just a challenge in other settings that I think art can do.
Yeah. I think something you said about the difference between a show like yours that is documenting an environmental injustice that maybe is different than a journalist is that a journalist is beholden to facts and an artist is loyal to truth. And facts and truth are often different. They resonate in our bodies differently. The other thing I know I came up sort of being trained as an artist was it's an artist's job to make the invisible visible for people. And something like your show, like the olfactoriness of it is truly invisible. And, you know, it's a different kind of sensory experience and you're making it visible. And once people can see something that maybe they were blind to before, they have a different responsibility to it. They have a different consciousness about how they relate to it. And I think that's part of the power of art, just kind of skimming the surface of that.
You know, so we talk here a lot about mercy is the desire to walk in the chaos of others. And I think what you are doing here in many ways is helping people touch the chaos, right? And give us some background about, you know, what do you hope that when people finish having this experience, when they finish stepping into as what is a truth, right? What do you hope happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I mean, it's funny because I've shown this work in other places and showing it in Pittsburgh. I think a lot of people are familiar with a lot of the kind of issues that it addresses. It's, you know, there's lots, like the kind of air quality community is very big in Pittsburgh, and there's lots of just public conversation about and the kind of the future of what's going to happen with some of these facilities and EPA regulation and things. So I think there's a lot kind of known, and there's a really big community doing a lot of work here, which is great. But I think even though I was like involved in all those things, like going to community meetings and things like that, I didn't really have a great kind of physical understanding of the experience until, I mean, I live not too far, so I sometimes get these wafts, but it's not the same as living right on the kind of the fence line that a lot of people who are the most affected where they live really close. And I was in a group of artists and we were doing different kind of visits to different sites and really just being somewhere for right up next to it for maybe 6 hours, just like getting headache, just really feeling the kind of physical experience of the smoke, the sense, also the sounds was like really physically overwhelming. And like I left not feeling very good. And so I think what you were just talking about, Sarah, about the kind of like these different types of knowing or understanding a problem or an experience. I hope that this can, a lot of people kind of know it theoretically or know it from the news, but I am hoping that this work can help you kind of understand the other kind of lived layer in a small way, of course, not in the way of fully. But I think that's kind of one goal for sure. And I think the film does that too in a little bit of a different way. It's less sensory, but I think it's trying to kind of show all the, even when there's like a lot of people really dedicated and lots of organizations that are working to make change, there's so many different there's lots of issues, like structural issues with sort of how the different policies and stuff and the laws around pollution are enforced. So I think what this does is it gives some insight into the people's experiences that are really trying to make change and the challenges that they face. And what you were talking about the different forms of knowledge and reporting, like the policies really, you know, for good reason, but it also really discounts a lot of people who live nearby's experiences of constantly like reporting health issues, people that live nearby, you know, increased risks of asthma, heart disease, cancer, and people kind of know that that's their experience, and they know that they are impacted deeply by living so close. but have long sort of been dismissed. So kind of also they're advocating for other ways for community members to like submit more data and information about their experience outside of what's like traditionally used to monitor these sites.
So you're hoping that a walk in others' shoes, even if it's temporarily, right? Even if it's for a moment, that it is going to be so illuminating that people are willing to take action? Is that what the both of you are doing with your work?
I think that's the hope. I think take action in there's lots of different ways that you can take action in terms of various different organizations that you could support that I'm happy to connect people to sort of from the show. And I think also illuminating various ways to kind of approach and communicate the problem.
So share with us, how does the work help us create the desire for the conversation around sustainability? And I think even more importantly, how do we use it to inspire action around the concept of sustainability?
Yeah, I think the goal is creating artwork that is like multi-layered, that can be experienced in different ways, visually, emotionally, physically, that really can provide an insight into this experience, related, like the experience of living in contaminated areas, living in areas where you kind of have no control over the like pollution and the emissions that you live in relationship to, that this can, people who visit, that it can, I think it opens up a conversation of this experience in many different layers of that experience. Like I'm trying to have a conversation about the kind of physical experience, the like impact on people's bodies, the transformation of people's bodies from pollution, as well as community members really trying to kind of change the community and change the situation and advocate for the community. So I think the goal is that it can start a conversation about this really big, complicated, and overwhelming topic, really, in like lots of entry points kind of into that conversation that then can like inspire and push people to continue those conversations kind of in the community and get involved in various community advocacy organizations and groups. So I think art is a way to do that. I think that's also not always like, I think it can bring people in from who are in different places in relationship to this topic in different ways, in a way that sometimes other like maybe political rhetoric or kind of I think it can meet people at different places where they are. I think that's something that I also appreciate about artwork, that like you can be kind of drawn to a physical object. You can be really overwhelmed by the feeling of the smell. Perhaps it's kind of, you're more, these artworks are more abstract. The smell is not as a kind of a physical experience, but the film is more narrative. And that, I think different things can bring different people into the conversation because different things will resonate with them.
Yeah. One thing that we talk a lot about in what's called social practice art is art as an interruption or an intervention in an otherwise sort of status quo blindness as you're walking around your life. And I think one of the brilliant things about your show, Erin, is that the smells are so novel. It's so unexpected. It is an interruption. I think people are going to come in here and they're going to want to talk about it after they leave, because I don't think most people will have experienced a gallery show with art like this in terms of just kind of a fun conversation starter. But that fun conversation starter is kind of a side entrance into a really complex, really important topic. And I'm so glad we have it here in a university gallery, because in terms of activating students, activating all the different people who might come to Carlow's campus and see this, we have the ability to bring in all the really incredible interdisciplinary connections to this show. So maybe a student comes in and they aren't an art major, right? They're a sciences major. They're interested in environmentalism, and they go back to a class they're in and can make a connection, excuse me, to what you're talking about here and apply it to a discipline that they are deeply studying. You know, my discipline of storytelling is very close to visual art. But what I would love my students to understand when they come and see this show is this idea of trusting the story we tell ourselves about our own lives and our own experience, which I think you were talking about in terms of hearing people at the community meetings try to say, this is what I'm experiencing, and I'm not being believed, right? Like, trusting your own experience is a really crucial part of coming of age. And having this here as a tool for our students, I think will help me do that better in my classroom. I think the other thing about activation is it's so interdependent with reflection.
So both of you, what have you, because of all this work you're doing, we're constantly trying to get our students to think at another level about, I say all the time to our students that, to whom much is given, much is required, to be an educated citizen is to be a person of responsibility. How are you seeing transformation in your classrooms? Is your work transforming the next generation of artists? And how do you know that? What's the proof points?
On Tuesday, we had an event here on campus with creative writing students and Mad Women in the Attic, sharing their work and having some intergroup dialogue. And I was walking past a table, and one of the questions that we were considering is, what does courage mean in art? How do you become a more courageous artist and a courageous citizen? And as I was getting my pizza, I heard one woman come over to another, and she whispered next to her, I want to let you know you're my definition of courage, based on a poem that woman had shared at that reading. To me, that is a small, quiet, transformational moment that happens because people are willing to make and share art together and take the time to honor their own experiences by doing it. And just me overhearing it transforms me,
That's
right?
good.
And gives me purpose
Right.
to do it.
And inspires you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
I think also in students is also like honoring everybody, other people's experiences in the classroom too. I think is like, I teach in the like sort of intro foundations art classes. So we're very much like learning, just like learning materials, learning kind of two-dimensional and three-dimensional ideas, and sort of starting to get comfortable with kind of making physical three-dimensional objects or drawing. So it's like a more kind of traditional art class, but really my goal within that is to show lots of examples of artists that like the ideas that we're learning about, kind of how they open up into larger kind of cultural conversations, artwork that's kind of political or kind of critiquing the status quo, or like representing complicated lived experiences. And so I think even in a kind of more class that's focused on like learning about drawing, learning about color, learning about volume, there's also all those things still relate to the world that we live in. And I think for me, when the students have conversation and give feedback about one another's work and give feedback about the artwork that I present as examples in class is, I think, the really exciting time where you see them kind of expanding and applying these things that they're learning to, that they're not these just sort of like abstract art ideas, that they are very like tied to cultural values, history, and kind of challenging some of those ideas and relating to some of those ideas.
why was it important for you to do this? You know,
This exhibition?
this exhibition, putting odors in a bottle, right? How do you even get odors in a bottle? That's a whole nother thing. But why was this important for you?
Yeah. I think most of my artwork just develops from being somewhere. So a lot of I don't know how much background or how deep to go, to go fully into the exhibition, but okay, brief background. I grew up in the Western United States, mainly in Idaho, and it's a fairly rural state. There's like just a really felt presence of the like relationship to the environment. So my family, like grandparents, great grandparents had been like sheep herders and farmers and like had this relationship to the land that's very different from my relationship to the environment. And I think that history just got me interested in looking at kind of cultural relationships to the land. So that's always kind of like a tie-in to my work, I would say, is there's a kind of classic in kind of Western thinking and science of the kind of like human culture nature divide, that these are sort of distinct things, even though human beings and human culture are sort of like developed, are part of nature, are affect the environment, are affected by the environment. And so I think that's kind of a through line in my work. So when I've been in Pittsburgh for 7 years, and when I moved to Pittsburgh, I think I was really, the industrial history I was really interested in. I think the landscape is really beautiful, like the sort of hills and the ravines and how kind of lush and green it is. And really in other places I've lived, here the like presence of the kind of transformation of the environment, like through industry, and then the like loss of some of that is kind of felt and present in a way that's different from other places I've lived. And so I've always just been really kind of like drawn to environmental sort of artwork, because that's kind of my orientation. But I think I was in, which I mentioned, I was in like a group of artists that we were doing different kind of learning more about the history of Pittsburgh, the kind of ecological history and the cultural history and the like industrial history. And we were visiting a lot of sites around town, like in Pittsburgh, but outside of Pittsburgh. Like we visited Oil City, which is sort of a site of kind of first commercial oil drilling, and like looking at the like petrochemical oil and like steel manufacturing history of the region. So really just like being involved in that conversation and visiting all these places was what really kind of motivated me. I'd always kind of been making work about that, but I think spending time really in proximity to some of these sites, like I mentioned, like just up along the fence, we were recording sounds, that kind of physical experience of being, we spent like a day at Clairton recording sounds just like along the fence, along the U.S. Steel's Clairton Coke Works. And I think that it was kind of the overwhelming physical experience when I was done that day that really kind of led me to want to explore that more in art, in terms of the sounds, the smells, it's the kind of like the physical sensation was really overwhelming.
And has anyone or groups gone through the experience, the installation, and made some decisions? Or has anything changed because of it that you know of?
I showed it in Cleveland a year ago, and we had organized a conversation with at the Cleveland Sculpture Center. So the folks that run Sculpture Center and I helped to organize a talk and kind of a panel and community discussion. So we had a scientist from Pitt who came out, and then everybody else was from Cleveland. And so that was very much a conversation of community members in Cleveland, and then people also that worked with the health department and that worked with and kind of an air quality initiative. And that was everyone kind of sharing their experience. And then there was the conversation, what I appreciated about it, it was kind of people trying to talk shop about like what what's working, what's not working, what they could be doing differently. And those are people that are like deeply involved in the conversation. So I think seeing the artwork resonated with them, and they're already doing a lot of this work. And what I appreciated about that is we weren't just kind of talking about the problem. They used it as an opportunity to like invite people that they wanted to meet, invite people that were important for them to talk to, and to kind of talk about what's working, what's not, what could we be doing differently, and pretty kind of more practical conversation.
So you're here at Carlow University. You made a decision to install here in our gallery. We're really grateful for it because I believe that our students and even our children, I think, will really enjoy this installation. But why did you decide to participate in our Impact series and bring your installation here?
Yeah. Well, before I was at Penn State, I taught part-time as an adjunct here at Carlow.
Oh.
So, and I co-taught a course with Amy, actually, that Amy Bowman McAloney,
Yes.
who we co-taught a class for freshman students that was like trying to use the exhibition in the gallery as the kind of foundational, like as kind of what we developed the curriculum around. So it was a kind of intro art history. Students were also making art, but using the gallery as a kind of gathering and community space, and then using the artwork as kind of an entry point for the class. So students learning about art, connecting with the artists, connecting with the artwork in the gallery. And that was, I think, an exciting class in terms of just like the relevancy of art. Most were students who were interested in art, but they weren't all interested in art. And as a way
Sure.
of making it, when people go to a museum, it can often feel sort of like, what does this mean? Why does this relate to me? What is this? It's really opaque. It doesn't always make
Yeah.
sense. Or it's like for other artists, or it's for people that are like deep into kind of talking about art. So it often feels like you don't have an entry point. And so I think the class was trying to really bring students into kind of building a relationship with art and like kind of breaking down some of those barriers and bringing their experience to it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the installation?
Yes. So the installation involves, it's sort of an olfactory, so smell-based installation, sculptural installation, and includes a short film. And it's all sort of developed from conversations with grassroots activists and organizers who are working in Pittsburgh around air quality and around industrial pollution. And so a little bit of background is that Pittsburgh is kind of consistently ranked in the top 10 cities for worst air quality in the country. And it's really predominantly two large-scale U.S. steel facilities that contribute kind of the most to the air quality. And typically how it works is, there's lots of EPA regulation, but this is not unique to Pittsburgh, but across the United States, is that there's sort of a, quote, pay-to-play model, which is that there's fines levied against you when you surpass how much, like, pollution, when you surpass what you're supposed to be doing in terms of emitting pollution. So typically most of the facilities budget in, they know that they're going to have fines levied against them. They know that they're going to pollute more than they're supposed to. And so they often budget in the fines. And so rather than kind of updating or kind of changing facilities, for example, they just pay rather than making the facilities kind of more sustainable. It's like cheaper and more profitable for them to just continue to pollute rather than to kind of change how they operate. And so that was kind of the background of what I was interested in terms of kind of what inspired that, of kind of living in a world of living within all these kind of chemical entanglements really against our will and against our kind of consent, and increases of sort of cancer and asthma, heart disease for communities that live close, but really increasingly across the United States because of
So talk about this piece here. What were you trying to, what's the message?
Oh, this one right here. This, okay, lots of things. I mean, I think my work is both abstract and there's like, abstract components and sort of more kind of literal narrative components. But this is all, so this, for one, the stump is actually something I gathered from what used to be a coal mine in Pittsburgh that's now a park. And the cast concrete is, I made a kind of original object that was meant to kind of reference sort of a tumor or sort of a growth or kind of a organic but also geologic, something that kind of was that line of sort of like bodily but also maybe of the earth. And I was kind of thinking about how our sort of like bodies and the land are sort of simultaneously transforming. And I wanted to reference, I kind of wanted to reference sort of the human body and the body of the earth as well.
Yeah. I'm thrilled to have artists like Erin come to Carlow, and I loved the conversation, the Impact series with John Fernandez and your work, and Jen Roth's work, all in conversation, and seeing how a place that's devoted to the liberal arts brings people together from different disciplines to make connections around the most important ideas that we're grappling with today, including caring for our environment and preserving it for future generations.
What does it mean for your students for this installation to be here?
I love that my students are going to get a chance to see what contemporary artists are really doing conceptually, socially, narratively, that they're seeing something that is not a painting on a wall. They're seeing something that is very active, that is really an experience, which is the direction that visual art and social practice art has been going for a long time, but sometimes universities are a little bit behind. And this shows a university that is really embracing somebody who's making art right now and showing students they have tons of ways to engage with topics they care about, things that are relevant to them, that impact their life, and they can express their concerns, they can express their desires, their incredible imaginations about what the solutions to these problems could be in so many ways. So I think it'll just be an incredible way for my students to start a conversation about how they can apply it to their own craft and art.
Right. So I can't thank you enough, both of you, for coming to talk with us today. Erin, thank you for bringing your installation to Carlow and exposing our community to your work and reminding us that this is another chaos that we must walk in to make the world better. And Sarah, thank you for continuing to inspire our students to think about these issues so that we indeed do create a more just and merciful world.